The streets of Austin were bathed in orange as the sun began to set. I, Lauren Cooper, gripped the steering wheel while checking on Ethan's sleeping face in the passenger seat. He must be tired from swimming practice today. As I listened to my 9-year-old son's steady breathing, I savored this peaceful moment of happiness. It had been a busy day from morning. After sending Ethan off to school, I completed 3 property assessments and had a meeting with a new client in the afternoon. As a real estate appraiser in my 2nd year of independence, I was finally starting to build a solid track record. Mom, I got a perfect score on yesterday's math test. That morning, Ethan had shown me his test with a beaming smile. For the past 2 years since the divorce, his smile had been my driving force. After graduating from the University of Texas at Austin, I worked for a major real estate company for 10 years before taking the leap to independence. With over 120 clients now, things were finally starting to fall into place. Still, an annual income of $80,000 didn't leave much room for extras. There was still $150,000 left on the house mortgage. Even so, I had no intention of giving up our home in the quiet residential area of Travis Heights. It was close to St. Edward's University and blessed with the excellent Eanes School District. More importantly, this house, filled with Ethan's memories, was our sanctuary. Should we have a barbecue this weekend? The church community had warmly embraced me as a single mother. I actively participated in PTA activities and valued our neighborhood relationships. This environment was perfect for raising a child. Mom, I improved my time again today. After practice, Ethan proudly reported his achievement. Swimming 3 times a week. This was one thing I wanted to continue after the divorce. It was one of our connections to Michael. I believe the twice-monthly visits with his father are essential for Ethan's emotional stability. Hey, Ethan. What would you like for breakfast tomorrow? Should we get something special from Whole Foods? I spoke to my sleeping son as we waited at a red light. No response. Instead, my smartphone started vibrating. A message from Steve. I have something important to discuss tonight. Or tomorrow evening if that works better. I had met Steve Parker 3 months ago at an industry party celebrating my independence as a successful real estate investor. 40 years old. I was honestly attracted to his gentlemanly demeanor and intellectual charm. It was the first special feeling I'd experienced since parting ways with Michael. Above all, his way with Ethan was wonderful. Last weekend, when we had dinner together at Magnolia Cafe, he listened attentively to my son's stories. Perhaps this could become our new family form. Such expectations had begun to slowly take root. I'm sorry. I'm spending tonight with my son. After sending that reply, I focused on driving. We should stop for groceries on the way home. We were running low on Ethan's favorite organic apple juice. I'll make his favorite grilled chicken for dinner. While thinking about the weekend shopping list, I hurried home with a peaceful feeling. When we arrived home, something felt off. Several police cars were parked on the street. 2 uniformed officers stood in front of our doorway. The time was 7:15 p.m. Ethan, wake up, I gently roused my son. He rubbed his eyes and slowly looked around. At that moment, the color drained from Ethan's face. Noticing my son's change, I instinctively gripped his hand. "Please don't enter the house right now," one of the officers called out loudly. Another officer approached us. The night wind felt cold against my cheeks. "Mrs. Cooper." We received a report from neighbors about sounds and screams coming from inside the house. That's when it happened. Ethan suddenly began trembling all over. "Dad." My heart froze at my son's trembling words. "Dad is trying to kill someone." That confession shattered our peaceful daily life in an instant. Sounds could be heard from inside the house, and another officer was requesting backup on his radio. The stares of gathering onlookers pierced through us. 2 weeks ago, when I stayed at Dad's house. Ethan continued, still trembling. He told us about waking up thirsty in the middle of the night. About the disturbing images he saw on his father Michael's computer. About seeing his father arguing with someone and being too scared to make a sound. "Mom, is it my fault that Dad is doing bad things?" While holding my trembling son's shoulders, I was thinking desperately. True, Michael had been an alcoholic, and that's why we divorced, but he had never been violent. Rather, I'd heard he had been diligently attending rehabilitation programs after the divorce and had even received a promotion at his construction company. Child support was deposited punctually every month. $500. Not a sufficient amount, but I thought it showed he was trying his best. The officer approached again. His expression, illuminated by moonlight, carried an unmistakable tension. "We're waiting for the SWAT team to arrive." Just then, a loud crash echoed from inside the house. Ethan clung to me, trembling even more violently. Sirens wailed through the quiet night in Travis Heights. Usually at this time, Ethan would be doing homework in the living room while I prepared dinner. The local news would be playing on TV, and children's playful voices would drift in from outside. Such peaceful daily scenes now felt like distant memories. I stood frozen, holding my son. The porch light flickered ominously as the moon hanging in Austin's night sky looked down impassively on this abnormal situation. "Please wait in this car until the SWAT team arrives." Following the officer's instruction, we sat in the back of the patrol car. Ethan clung to my arm, still trembling slightly. Fragmentary conversations could be heard from the car's radio. "Suspect still not secured. Possible hostage situation, proceed with caution. Requesting backup." The clock showed 7:30 p.m. Another patrol car arrived, and officers quickly took their positions. I held my son's hand, desperately trying to maintain my composure. "Ethan, can you tell Mommy about what you saw at Dad's house?" While rubbing my trembling son's back, I spoke gently. Ethan took a deep breath and began speaking in a shaky voice. "At Dad's house, when I woke up at night. 2 weeks ago, Saturday. It was one of the twice-monthly visits with his father. A normal weekend like any other. They had dinner, watched TV, and went to bed as usual. But everything changed in the middle of the night. I was thirsty. I went to get water. As he descended the stairs, he noticed a bluish light leaking from the study. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear his father's voice. It seemed he was on the phone with someone. He said, "There's no time left. We have to stop him." Curiosity got the better of him, and Ethan peeked through the door. Unfamiliar photos were arranged on the computer screen. Pictures of our house exterior. Photos of me returning from work. Images of me meeting with Steve. And Dad was putting red X marks on someone's photos. As I listened to his confession, chills ran down my spine. I see, that must have been scary. I pulled Ethan closer. My son continued. Dad said he was going to visit tomorrow, but that person said, let's wait and see a little longer. Just then, a loud noise echoed from inside the house. The sound of breaking glass. Followed by a man's angry shout. Ethan's grip on me tightened. Ma'am. An officer approached the car. Despite his stern expression, there was a hint of compassion in his face. Has your ex-husband been in contact with you recently? I shook my head. Besides Ethan's drop-offs and pickups, I had avoided direct contact with Michael. I thought that was appropriate distance as a mother with custody. That's when it happened. A familiar voice rang out from inside the house. Stop. Don't come any closer. Michael's voice. But different from his usual calm tone. A desperate cry mixed with fear. Mom. Dad. Ethan cried out. Simultaneously, a dull thud echoed from the house. The sound of something falling. Then, silence. The officers moved quickly. The silhouette of our house loomed ominously in the streetlight. The gathered neighbors' eyes were fixed on us. Among them, I spotted Mrs. Jones, whom we see every Sunday at church. She waved with a worried expression. It's okay, Lauren. God is watching over us. Those words brought some comfort. Yes, stay calm. I need to be strong for Ethan's sake. I should contact Steve. My hand stopped as I reached for my smartphone. If Michael really was trying to kill someone, who was the target? Michael must have known about my relationship with Steve. No, not yet. I held my son close while staring at the house before us. The house where I had once built a happy home with Michael. The house that had watched over Ethan's growth. What was happening inside now? Again, sounds came from inside. This time, footsteps running up the stairs. Then, the sound of a second-floor window opening. The officer's tension increased. Ethan's body trembled. I held my son tightly, watching the house with something like a prayer in my heart. The cold night wind brushed our cheeks. An unusual tension hung over the quiet residential area of Travis Heights. Even after 8 p.m., the tense situation continued. A black SWAT van arrived, and team members in full black gear quickly deployed. Under the streetlights, their figures wavered like eerie shadows. Lauren. I turned to see Sarah Johnson, our next-door neighbor, running toward us. The PTA vice president and a dear friend who often helps with Ethan's swimming practice carpools. Won't you rest at my house? Ethan must be tired. At those words, I came back to my senses. In the back of the patrol car, Ethan had fallen asleep. Tear tracks still marked the cheeks of my son, exhausted from fatigue and fear. Thank you, but... As I was about to decline, another sound came from inside the house. Something falling. Then, a man's groan. At that moment, Ethan woke up. Mom. Dad. Dad isn't a bad person. As my son spoke in a trembling voice, something I hadn't noticed before began connecting in my mind. Officer, I need to tell you something. I left Ethan with Sarah and approached a nearby officer. Actually, I've recently started seeing someone. I began talking about Steve. Our 3-month relationship. His glamorous career as a real estate investor. His kindness toward Ethan. And recently, there were some concerning things. I recalled Steve's strange behavior last week. How he tried to casually probe into my financial situation. How he brought up the topic of insurance. And how oddly interested he was in Ethan's visitation days. The officer listened to my story with a serious expression. He reported something on his radio. Meanwhile, sounds continued from inside the house. Furniture falling. Footsteps. And Michael's voice. Desperate shouts mixed with anger. Then, the sound of something breaking. Glass, perhaps. SWAT team members moved swiftly. Some went around to the backyard, others took positions at the front entrance. Every movement seemed precisely calculated. Ma'am, your ex-husband has been providing us with information recently. The officer spoke in a quiet voice. About a person named Steve Parker. Actually, he has a record of domestic violence in multiple states. At those words, the blood drained from my face. Steve, who was so gentle and gentlemanly. Who had been so good to Ethan. He has a history of violence against his ex-wife. And his career as an investor was completely fabricated. My knees nearly gave out. Sarah supported me from beside. It seems your assets were his target. Especially. The officer's explanation was cut off by a loud noise from inside the house. Simultaneously, the SWAT team members began moving. Then. Dad. Ethan's voice made me turn around. 2 figures burst out from the gate leading to the backyard. One was Michael, stumbling and bleeding. The other was Steve. Something gleamed in his hand. A knife? Let go. Michael shouted. A struggle broke out between them. The SWAT team quickly approached. Seeing this scene, Ethan broke free from my arms. Dad. Ethan, no. I desperately chased after my son. A moment that felt like time had stopped. In the backyard lit by streetlights, everything happened in an instant. Michael turning at Ethan's cry. Steve seizing that moment to raise his arm. But the SWAT team quickly subdued Steve. I was holding Ethan close. He kept calling Michael's name while trembling. An ambulance arrived, and Michael was carried away on a stretcher. He seemed conscious. He was able to hold Ethan's hand and manage a faint smile. Ma'am, we need to talk. An officer approached. But before that, I squeezed my son's hand tightly. Ethan, Dad wasn't a bad person after all, was he? Tears welled up in my son's face. Dad. Dad was trying to protect us. The ambulance siren wailed through the quiet residential area of Travis Heights. Under the moonlight, Steve was handcuffed and pushed into a patrol car. Family shapes can sometimes be complex and hard to understand. But true love never changes. That night, we learned this lesson painfully. A week had passed since the incident. While the streets of Travis Heights remained as quiet and peaceful as ever, our lives had changed dramatically. Michael was discharged after 3 days in the hospital. Though he had deep cuts, his life wasn't in danger. Meanwhile, Steve Parker, or rather, Stephen Riley, was charged with multiple felonies. Here's his arrest record. The documents the detective showed me revealed a face of his I never knew. Domestic violence records in 3 states. A prison sentence for fraud. And severe violence against 2 ex-wives. All crimes committed under fabricated identities. His method was always the same. The detective continued explaining. Target wealthy single women, especially single mothers. Approach them posing as an investor, build a relationship. Then, after marriage, steal their assets and become violent. In the worst cases. Insurance money. I shuddered at those words. Thinking about how Michael had saved both Ethan's and my life sent chills down my spine. Mr. Cooper began investigating after becoming suspicious of Stephen Riley's background. The testimony of John Taylor, Michael's colleague and former police officer, was included. They had secretly conducted investigations and uncovered Steve's true identity. And then tried to prevent him from approaching us. Mom. I turned to see Ethan standing there. Today was finally time to visit Michael again. Dad's waiting. Taking my son's hand, we headed to Magnolia Cafe. The same place we had visited with Steve before. But today, it held a completely different meaning. Lauren, Ethan. Michael was waiting for us at a window seat. The scars on his face were still fresh, but his expression was peaceful. Dad. Ethan rushed to him. His father gently embraced him. Seeing this scene brought tears to my eyes. I'm sorry. As I struggled with words, Michael slowly shook his head. I'm the one who should apologize. I should have told you everything. A waitress brought menus. A family having lunch together like any other Sunday. But today was special. Can you tell us about that night? At my question, Michael set down his coffee cup. John told me that Steve was planning to break into the house that night. His colleague John had been investigating using his old police connections. From Steve's phone records, they had detected his plan. He was targeting the time you'd return from swimming practice. I held my coffee cup with trembling hands. Ethan silently picked at his French fries while listening to his father's words. I just wanted to protect you both. That's all. Simple words. But the depth of feeling they contained made my chest tighten. The photos Ethan saw. Evidence of Steve's criminal record. Photos showing his true nature. That's why they had red X marks. To identify the suspect. Dad's a hero. At Ethan's words, Michael gave a slightly embarrassed smile. He gently patted his son's head as the boy worriedly examined his father's scars. I'm no hero. Just a father. At those words, I burst into tears. Other customers turned to look, but I didn't care. Will you continue to be Ethan's dad? Michael quietly nodded at my question. That's my only pride. Ethan smiled happily. His smile was as bright and warm as the sun. On our way home, the three of us walked together. A father and child who usually take separate paths were now walking in the same direction. Hey, how about having a barbecue next weekend? Ethan suddenly suggested. Dad should come too. Everyone at church would be happy. Michael and I looked at each other and smiled. The former married couple would never return to what they were. But a new form of family was being born here. Lauren, if you can forgive me. I gently interrupted Michael's words. No more apologies. Let's look forward from now on. The streets of Travis Heights were bathing in the sunset. The sound of bells rang out from St. Edward's University campus. Dad, come watch my next swimming meet, okay? Of course, I will. Listening to the conversation between father and son, I looked up at the sky. Bonds that were wounded and almost lost. But because of this crisis, we were able to find the true shape of our family. Love sometimes appears in unexpected forms. What's important is distinguishing whether that love is real. And never letting go of those who possess true love. With this lesson in our hearts, our new story was about to begin. The porch light warmly welcomed us home. There was nothing to fear anymore. Because here was a genuine family, protected by real love.